Oyster Bay, Long Island, summer of 1906. A wealthy New York banker named Charles Henry Warren has rented a summer house for his family, staff included. It's the kind of place typhoid fever isn't supposed to reach. In 1906, the disease is understood as a problem of slums and bad city sewage, not of rented lawns and hired cooks on Long Island's waterfront. On August 27th, one of the Warren daughters falls ill. High fever, rash, violent stomach pain. Within days, Mrs. Warren is sick too. Then 2 maids, then another daughter, then the gardener. By the time it stops, 6 of the 11 people living in that house have typhoid fever. There's no obvious source. The water's been tested, the milk's been tested. Nothing turns up. The family who owns the house, worried the outbreak will scare off future renters, hires a sanitary engineer named George Soper to find out what happened, because nobody else can. Soper doesn't know it yet, but he's about to spend the next year chasing a woman who has never been sick a day in her life. Soper starts where every typhoid investigation starts: water, sewage, and dairy. All clean. That rules out the usual suspects, which means something else carried the disease into that house. Something that arrived and left with the household staff. Not the plumbing. He starts pulling employment records. The Warrens had hired a new cook that summer, an Irish immigrant named Mary Mallon, who started just before the outbreak and left shortly after it ended. Soper tracks her work history backward, and what he finds stops him cold. Over the previous decade, Mallon had cooked for 8 different families. In 7 of those 8 households, typhoid fever had broken out shortly after she arrived. 22 cases, 2 deaths. Every single time she'd already moved on to the next job before anyone connected the pattern. Soper even works out how it happened. Mallon's specialty is a dessert nobody suspects. Ice cream with raw peaches cut into it, never touched by heat, the one dish on her menu capable of carrying bacteria straight from her hands to a spoon. As Soper puts it in his own notes, he doubts there's a better way for a cook to spread infection through a household than that. He has a hypothesis nobody's proven in America before: that Mallon isn't sick, has never been sick, and never will be, but that she's carrying the bacteria anyway and shedding it into everything she cooks. A healthy carrier. In 1906, this isn't an accepted medical fact, it's a theory, and Soper is about to test it on a woman who has no reason to believe a word of it. In March 1907, Soper finds her again, working as a cook in a Park Avenue home in Manhattan. He asks her directly for a sample of her blood, urine, and stool. Mallon's response is immediate. She grabs a carving fork and comes at him. Soper leaves without his samples and without much doubt left in his mind. Soper can't get Mallon to cooperate, so the New York City Health Department sends someone else, Dr. Sarah Josephine Baker, backed by police officers and an ambulance. Mallon runs. It takes hours to find her, hiding behind a row of ash cans on the property. She's taken by force. Baker later describes holding her down for the entire ride to the hospital, calling it like being trapped in a cage with an angry lion. Mallon is not exaggerating her fury for effect. As far as she's concerned, she is being kidnapped by people who cannot point to a single day in her life when she's ever been ill. The lab results come back anyway. Her stool contains Salmonella typhi, the bacterium that causes typhoid fever, in significant quantities. She has never had a symptom. She may never have one, but she is undeniably carrying and spreading a disease that has already killed 2 people and sickened 20 more, entirely without her own knowledge or consent. It's the first confirmed case of an asymptomatic healthy carrier of a communicable disease ever documented in the United States. Soper was right. The problem is that being right doesn't come with an obvious next step. What do you do with a healthy woman who cannot be cured of something she doesn't have, but who kills people simply by cooking for them? New York's answer is to send her to North Brother Island, a quarantine outpost in the East River, and leave her there. No criminal charge, no trial. Just an indefinite confinement, justified entirely by a health code provision that had never been used quite this way before. Mallon spends more than 2 years on North Brother Island before a lawyer takes her case. In 1909, she sues for her freedom, presenting results from a private lab that came back negative. The New York Supreme Court denies her petition anyway, so she stays. In 1910, a new health commissioner takes a different view. He releases her on one condition. She can never again take a job that involves handling food, and she has to report to the health department regularly. Mallon agrees. She's released, and then she discovers what the rest of her life is actually going to look like. Every other job available to an unskilled immigrant woman in 1910 New York pays a fraction of what cooking paid, so she struggles. Eventually, under an assumed name, she goes back to the only trade she knows. It works for a while. But then, in 1915, an outbreak hits Sloan Maternity Hospital in Manhattan. 25 cases and 2 deaths, traced back to a recently hired kitchen worker calling herself something other than her real name. It's her. Authorities find her in a home in Westchester County and return her to North Brother Island. This time, there's no release. She stays there for the rest of her life. She suffers a paralytic stroke in 1932 and dies 6 years later, in 1938, after roughly a quarter century in confinement, most of it after a mistake that arguably shouldn't have needed a lifetime sentence. Here's the part of the story that complicates the neat version. Mary Mallon was never the only person who had this condition. Historians estimate that hundreds of healthy typhoid carriers were identified in New York City alone during this period, and some sources put the number in the thousands nationally as well. None of the others were locked away for decades. None were denied a trial. The pattern historians point to isn't subtle. Mallon was poor, Irish, unmarried, and worked in domestic service at a time when all 4 of those things made her an easy target for a public health system that needed a visible villain. Newspapers didn't help. She was drawn in cartoons cracking skulls into a frying pan. They called her a human culture tube and a walking typhoid fever factory. All she wanted was simply not to be treated like something less than human for an illness she never had. Across her whole working life, Mallon is linked to as many as 57 infections and 3 confirmed deaths. That's a real toll, and real grief is attached to it, but it sits uneasily next to the fact that the system responsible for containing that harm chose again and again to make an example out of the one carrier least equipped to fight back while leaving hundreds of others to go about their lives. She didn't choose to carry what she carried. What happened to her afterward wasn't just about public health. It was also about exactly who New York decided was disposable enough to make an example of.